In a wealthy suburb of New York, in a luxurious mansion, lives an elderly millionaire, Henry Blackwell. He is 68 years old and the owner of an influential energy innovation company. His whole life is a constant struggle for success, and now, at the end of his years, Henry has everything: wealth, influence, and a young wife named Clara. Clary is 27. She is a beauty with perfect manners, always in expensive dresses and jewelry, which she wears ostentatiously, as if at an exhibition. For Henry, Clara is his pride, proof that money can do anything. But for Clara herself, this marriage is just an agreement. Her life is endless parties, shopping, and the role of the ideal wife in front of the cameras. Behind the glitz and glamour, she has long tired of an old man who spends most of his time in his office or thinking about an heir for his business. The new year was approaching, and Henry decided to hold a big corporate party at home. I invited my business partners and friends. For weeks, HR had been decorating the huge mansion to make everything look perfect. Clara woke up early to finish the final preparations. She was always one to pay attention to detail, even if Henry paid minimal attention to it. Her day began with a perusal of the chef's menu: foie gras, marbled beef, exquisite seafood, and desserts that resembled works of art. Clara went up to her dressing room, a huge room filled with luxurious clothes and jewelry. She was choosing between several dresses when her stylist came in. "Evening event, many guests. You need something elegant but not flashy," advised the stylist. Clara chose a tight black dress with an open back. She looked elegant and seductive at the same time. She accessorized with a dainty diamond necklace, a gift from Henry for their anniversary, and earrings that accentuated her graceful features. While the stylist was doing her hair, Clara was silent, looking into the mirror. She saw a woman who looked flawless, but inside she was full of doubts. "You're stunning," said the stylist, finishing the job. "Thank you," Clara replied, putting on her fake smile. Before going downstairs, Clara looked into the children's room. Eliza was playing the piano, and Michael was building something with a construction kit. She approached them and for a moment allowed herself to be just a mother. "Will you be nice to the babysitter while Mom is busy?" she asked. "Yes, Mother," replied Eliza, smiling. Clara kissed them and went to the hall, where the first 10 guests were already gathering. There was a smile on his face, a cold calmness in his eyes, and in his heart, the anticipation of an evening that could become ordinary, if not for Adam. The luxurious mansion of Henry Blackwell shone in the light of crystal chandeliers filled with guests from high society. It was an annual charity party organized by Henry himself to strengthen his status not only as a businessman, but also as a philanthropist. All eyes were on his young wife, Clara, who, as always, looked flawless. Henry, as usual, was busy interacting with influential guests, leaving Clara to entertain herself. She sipped her champagne, feeling her tension wash away with each sip. That's when she spotted him, Adam, a young and attractive department head at her husband's company. His penetrating gaze lingered on her for longer than was appropriate, and she felt her heart beat faster. Adam approached her confidently, with a charming smile. "You look stunning, Mrs. Blackwell," he said, leaning slightly toward her. Clara smiled as she sipped her cocktail. "Thank you, Adam, but I am sure that you are here for business, not for compliments." Their conversation, full of jokes and light hints, quickly became more intimate. She was charmed by his confidence, his energy, all the things that Henry lacked. Clara felt how under the influence of alcohol and adrenaline she was losing control. Half an hour later, they both found themselves in a cozy nook by the stairs. Adam leaned closer and she didn't back down. His voice was muffled. "You don't want to be alone with this boredom, do you?" Her hands trembled as he touched her waist. Without saying a word, Clara walked with him to the corridor that led to the toilet rooms. In a minute, they were already inside. Hot kisses, hands searching for each other, speed and forbidden risk made this moment unforgettable. They broke up while the party was still going on. Clara, smoothing her hair and adjusting her dress, returned to the guests, trying to keep her face. Her heart was beating like crazy, and the taste of something forbidden remained on her lips. Clara felt terrible after that night. When she went upstairs, Henry was already lying in his bedroom looking through some documents. He gave her only a cursory glance and asked, "How's the party? I hope you had a good time. His voice was calm, almost indifferent, but that only added to her guilt. She spoke. Yes, everything went perfectly. The room was silent, but Clara could feel her mind being assaulted by memories of what had happened to Adam. She felt a sense of shame, but at the same time the deep passion she felt with him did not let go. The next morning, while Henry went to the office, her phone lit up with a message. It was Adam. I can't stop thinking about you. That night was the best thing that ever happened to me. I want to see you again. Clara tried to ignore the message, but her heart was pounding. She read it again and then again. Adam continued to write. You are so beautiful, so alive. Why are you hiding in this golden cage? You deserve more than just wife status. These words ignited a fire in her soul. Clara knew it was wrong, but she could feel her hand reaching for the phone itself. She answered briefly, I'm thinking about you, too. I dream about you every night. Shall we meet tonight? He wrote. Clara fought with herself for a long time, but in the end she gave up. She lacked love, emotions, passion. Henry became more of a friend to her, almost a father than a husband. Her body and soul yearned for the warmth that Adam had given her. One evening, Clara told Henry that she was going to meet a friend. Her heart was pounding as she walked into the hotel room where Adam was waiting. His gaze was hungry. He immediately drew her to him, and they spent several passionate hours together. I can't do without you, he whispered, lying next to him. That's wrong, Adam, Clara said, but her words sounded unconvincing. It is wrong that you live with a person you do not love. You deserve more. His words flooded her thoughts again. She returned home late at night, trying to pretend that nothing had happened, but her soul was already divided. Since then, their meetings have become more frequent. Adam always found words that made her forget about reality. He was young, attractive, and gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time: desire. But every time she returned home to Henry, a wave of guilt washed over her. She tried to stop, push Adam away, but every time he wrote to her, I miss you, I need you, she answered and found herself in his arms again. Clara could no longer decide who she was: a loving wife who cheated, or a woman who was looking for herself in passion and love. Her life was getting more and more confusing, and she didn't know how to stop it. Henry Blackwell always looked like a model of confidence and strength. Even at the age of 68, he continues to run the business empire with the same vigor with which he started decades ago. But recently his health began to deteriorate. Frequent headaches, fatigue, and weakness, which he attributed to fatigue, began to become more frequent. One day, while sitting in his office during a meeting, Henry felt a severe pain in his chest. His hands trembled, his vision became hazy. He tried to get up, but his legs wouldn't obey. All he managed to say was, I feel bad. Colleagues immediately called an ambulance, and Henry lost consciousness before its arrival. He was taken to the hospital in critical condition. Clara was at home when the call rang from the hospital. She seemed calm as she read a message from Adam inviting her to dinner that evening. But when she picked up the phone, her world came crashing down. Miss Blackwell, your husband was taken to the hospital. He is in serious condition. We recommend arriving as soon as possible. The receiver fell from her hands, and Clara froze for a moment. A wave of panic covered her body. She realized that she had to be by Henry's side now, despite everything that had happened recently. She rushed to the hospital, praying on the way that everything would be okay with him. Her heart was beating fast, and words of guilt sounded in her head. How could I do that with him? He doesn't deserve this. When Clara arrived at the hospital, she was met by a doctor. He had a heart attack, he said. His condition is stable, but he needs a thorough examination. We have to conduct additional analyses. Clara entered the ward and saw Henry lying on the bed with a drip. His face was pale and his breathing was weak. He raised his head and saw her. Clara, you're here, he said, softly smiling. Her eyes filled with tears. She sat down next to him, took his hand, and whispered, I will always be here. At that moment, she felt guilt grip her heart. Clara knew that now everything had to change. She needed to be by Henry's side, even though her soul still yearned for Adam. After Henry fell asleep, Clara left the room and took out the phone. Adam wrote her several messages. Where are you? I miss you. Let's meet today. I need you. Her fingers froze over the screen. She didn't know how to answer. Everything inside her was screaming that she should end this relationship, but her heart wanted otherwise. She closed the phone, deciding to stay with her husband this time. After this incident, Clara spent more time around Henry, trying to be a good wife. But her internal conflict only intensified. Henry was attentive and grateful for her support, and Adam was more and more insistent on meetings. The day at the hospital seemed endless. Clara sat next to Henry's bed, trying not to look at her phone, which was constantly vibrating in her bag. Her husband lay with his eyes closed, his face pale and his breathing even. She convinced herself that he was asleep and quietly went out into the corridor to answer the bell. Her heart beat faster when she saw Adam's name on the screen. She looked around, checked if anyone was around, and finally answered. "Adam, I can't talk right now," she whispered. His voice was insistent. "You're ignoring me again. I miss you, Clara. I want to see you." She sat down on a bench in the corner of the corridor, covering the phone with her hand, and sighing answered, "I miss you too. I think about you all the time." "Why are we making it difficult? Just be with me." "You know you want it," he insisted. Clara closed her eyes, imagining his face. Her voice became soft and warm. "I want that too. Kisses to you, Adam." Henry was awake. He heard Clara get up and leave, and he struggled out of bed. His heart was clenched not only from physical pain, but also from some strange premonition. He walked slowly to the door and stopped when he heard her voice. "I miss you too. I think about you all the time." "Kiss you, Adam." These words sounded like a knife thrust into his chest. He froze in place, barely restraining himself from opening the door and asking directly, but instead, he went back to bed. As he lay there, he stared at the ceiling, trying to digest what he had heard. Clara ended the conversation and returned to the ward, sure that Henry was still asleep. She quietly went to the bed, sat down next to him, and put her hand on his. "You've been away for a long time," Henry said quietly, keeping his eyes open. She shuddered slightly, but quickly answered. "A friend called? Asks how you feel." Henry opened his eyes and looked at her. His voice was calm, but there was something more hidden in it. "I hope you explained everything to her." Clara did not understand the hint, only smiled slightly. But at this moment, Henry was already sure. His wife had a secret, and he will do everything to find out the truth. Henry was lying on the bed, silently staring at the ceiling. He couldn't get the things out of his head. Clara's words, her soft voice, the way she spoke about someone else, and how easily she lied to his face. The heart was constricted by the pain, which was not only physical. He could feel the frustration tearing him apart from the inside. Clara, unsuspecting, was sitting next to her, scrolling through something on her phone. Her appearance was calm, but Henry saw something artificial in this calmness. He tried to get up, but his chest suddenly tightened with pain. He clutched his heart and breathed heavily, his face contorted and his eyes clouded. "Clara," he whispered in a weak voice. Clara looked up to see him trying to sit up, only to fall back onto the pillows. She jumped up, her heart pounding in panic. "Henry, what's wrong with you?" she shouted, pressing the nurse call button. Henry did not answer. His breathing became more and more difficult. Nurses rushed to the ward and quickly began to provide assistance. Henry was taken to the intensive care unit. The doctors informed Clara that he had suffered a second heart attack, and this time it was much more serious. "His heart is in a very weak state. We will do everything possible, but he needs peace and complete rest," the doctor explained. Clara sat in the waiting room, clutching her arms to her chest. She felt guilty. She knew that this attack could be the result of stress, and she suspected that her secrets could have affected Henry. Henry was transferred to the intensive care unit. His condition remained critical, and doctors decided not to let anyone in except medical personnel. Clara was sitting in the waiting room, clutching the phone. She could feel her inner conflict reaching its limit. Adam kept texting her, and the voice in her head kept telling her to stop. "I have to do it," she decided. "I have to break up with him and focus on Henry." She stood up, took a deep breath, and left the hospital. But leaving the door, she did not even notice that her movements attracted attention. At that moment, Henry's lawyer, Mr. Lawrence Davies, arrived at the hospital. He brought the documents for the family, but when he saw Clara quickly leave the building, he immediately felt something suspicious. She looked nervous, as if she was in a hurry, not even noticing his presence. "Where is she in such a hurry?" he muttered under his breath. His professional caution told him to follow her. He got into the car and followed, keeping a safe distance. Clara arrived at a small hotel in the center of the city. Her heart pounded as she walked into the lobby and then took the elevator to the third floor. She knew she was doing the right thing, but this decision was difficult for her. Adam was waiting for her in the room with a charming smile and a glass of wine in his hands. "Finally you came," he said, pulling her to him. But Clara stood aside. "Adam, we have to stop this. I can't live a double life anymore." His face changed. The smile disappeared and a cold glint appeared in his eyes. "What do you mean?" he asked, crossing his arms. "I have to stay with my husband. He's in intensive care and I can't betray him, especially now," she said, barely holding back tears. Adam moved closer, grabbing her hand. "Don't pretend, Clara. You said you loved me. It's just fear, and you know it." Clara did not answer. She wanted to leave, but he grabbed her and kissed her. At first she tried to distance herself, but for a second she succumbed to the passion. Mr. Davis, who was watching her, was standing in the parking lot opposite their room window. He took the camera and took several pictures of Clara and Adam kissing. "This is interesting," he muttered, looking at the photos. His professional cold-bloodedness did not allow him to immediately draw conclusions, but he understood that these shots could become key in the future. After the kiss, Clara pulled away sharply. "This is the end, Adam. Don't try to hold me back," she said, and quickly left the room. Her face burned with shame and pain. She knew she had made the right decision, but her heart was heavy. Returning to the hospital, she had no idea that a web was already being woven behind her back, which would soon change her whole life. Mr. Davis, holding the photos in his hands, decided to talk to Henry as soon as the opportunity arose. Clara returned to the hospital, trying to gather her thoughts. Her decision to break up with Adam was the right one, but she couldn't shake the heavy feeling that her actions would have consequences. She walked over to the emergency room and, looking through the glass at Henry, felt a wave of guilt. Meanwhile, Mr. Davis had already returned to his office. He looked carefully at the photos taken. Clara and Adam together in the hotel. Their kiss. Professionally, this was invaluable testimony that could influence any legal matter involving Henry's estate. "Well, Mrs. Blackwell, you seem to have some secrets of your own," he muttered to himself as he prepared an envelope of photographs. One day, as she sat by Henry's bed, the doctor informed her that he was beginning to gradually emerge from a critical condition. "That's good news, Mrs. Blackwell. But he needs complete rest and no stress," said the doctor. Clara gave a small sigh of relief. A few days later, when Henry was transferred to a regular ward, Mr. Davis came to the hospital. He had come not only to see his client, but also to speak with Clara. Clara was in the hallway when he approached. His cold gaze made her feel uncomfortable. "Miss Blackwell," he began, "I would like to speak with you alone." Clara froze for a moment, but quickly regained her usual mask of calm. "About what exactly, Mr. Davies?" "About your devotion to your husband." His words sounded almost mockingly. He took an envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. "I recommend you take a look at it." Clara opened the envelope, and her face turned white when she saw the photos. It was footage of her meeting with Adam, how she enters the hotel, how they kiss. Her hands trembled and her heart began to beat wildly. "What does that mean?" Her voice sounded weak. "That means if you don't act on your husband's behalf, those photos could end up where you don't want them to be," Davis replied. Clara realized that she was trapped. Her secrets were now a tool that could be used against her. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "It's simple, Mrs. Blackwell. I want you to stay close to your husband and not create any more situations that could hurt him. He needs peace now, and if you can't do that, I'll tell him the truth." Clara realized that she no longer had a choice. She agreed to the lawyer's terms. Mr. Davies knew his client had a right to know the truth, but he also understood that this truth could be another blow for Henry that he might not survive. Clara found herself in a situation where her every step was carefully monitored. Her life had become a game where any wrong move could destroy everything she was trying to preserve. A few weeks passed and Henry was discharged from the hospital. Although doctors insisted on limiting his work, he could not stay away from his business. Henry returned to his office where he was greeted by mountains of paperwork and a series of appointments he had missed while ill. Clara, for her part, tried to be a loving wife. She spent more time at home, accompanied Henry to work dinners, and seemed attentive and caring. But inside her heart was pounding. She constantly felt the fear that her secret might leak out. One day, when Henry was sitting in his office, he decided to organize the documents that the lawyer had left for him during his treatment. Inside the box, he found several folders of legal papers and an envelope that immediately caught his attention. Henry opened the envelope and froze. In his hands were photos that clearly showed Clara and Adam, how they enter the hotel, how they kiss. Henry's heart squeezed painfully, but this time it was not a physical pain, but an emotional one. His fingers trembled, and his eyes were filled with anger and frustration. Each photo was proof that his suspicions were well-founded. "How could she?" he said quietly, smiling bitterly. Henry immediately called Mr. Davis into his office. When the lawyer walked in, Henry threw the photos on the table in front of him. "How long have you known this?" Henry asked coldly. Davis, keeping his eyes on the client, calmly answered, "I found out about it when you were in the hospital. I thought it best not to trouble you in your condition." "Do not disturb!" Henry burst into a cry. "This is my wife! You decide you have the right to keep it from me?" "My purpose was to protect you, Mr. Blackwell," Davies replied. "You were in a critical condition even without this." Henry laughed bitterly as he sank into his chair. His gaze became heavy and focused on the lawyer. "Now I know, and now I will decide how to deal with it." Henry returned home that evening, hiding his anger. Clara, as usual, greeted him with a warm smile. "How was your day?" she asked, handing him a glass of her favorite wine. Henry stared at her silently. His gaze was heavy, almost unbearable. Finally he spoke. "Clara, we have to talk." She felt her heart sink. Her smile disappeared. "What happened, Henry?" He took the photos out of his pocket and dropped them on the table between them. "This, Clara, it happened." Clara looked at the photos and her face instantly turned pale. She couldn't find the words. Her voice stuck in her throat. "What can you say to that?" His voice sounded quiet, but it had more power than a shout. Clara sighed, trying to compose herself. "Henry, I'm sorry. I wanted to stop it. I tried." "Did you try?" he interrupted. "Is that what you call trying?" She tried to explain, but Henry raised his hand, stopping her. "I don't want excuses. I want the truth. Do you love him?" Clara lowered her head. She didn't know how to answer. "You can't even say no," Henry said, his voice shaking with anger and pain. Henry went into his bedroom, leaving Clara standing there. Clara, left alone, realized that her life would never be the same again. Her secrets were out, and now she had to find a way to live with it or lose everything she had tried to keep. Henry could not sleep for a long time that evening. His mind was seething with anger, pain, and a sense of betrayal. Clara, his wife, whom he once adored and for whom he did everything, betrayed him in the worst way. When morning came, he already had a clear plan of action. He called her to his office over breakfast. Clara walked in, holding herself tight, knowing the conversation would be difficult. "Clara," he said coldly, "I see no point in continuing this farce. You betrayed me, you humiliated our family, and now you will get what you deserve." "Henry, please let me explain," she began, but he abruptly cut her off. "Explain? You explained everything when you kissed Adam in the hotel. You lost the right to be part of this family." Henry took out the documents that had already been prepared by his lawyer. "I am filing for divorce. You are leaving this house today." Clara froze, her eyes filled with tears. "And the children?" she whispered. "The children stay with me. They don't need a mother who isn't capable of loyalty and honesty," snapped Henry. She tried to convince him, begged him to leave her near the children, but Henry was adamant. His decision was final. After banishing Clara, Henry began to implement the second part of his plan. His anger was directed not only at his wife, but also at her lover. Adam, a young and ambitious employee of his company, has now become the main target. Henry instructed his legal department to prepare forged documents that would prove that Adam was involved in financial fraud in the company. They falsified reports, fake deals, and transferred some of the funds to an account that looked like Adam's personal account. When everything was ready, Henry called the police. "I have evidence that one of my employees was embezzling company funds. His actions have caused me a huge loss, and I want him to be held accountable," Henry told investigators as he handed them a folder of evidence. A few days later, Adam was detained just in the office. He was shocked and tried to prove his innocence, but all the evidence was against him. "This is the reason!" he shouted as he was escorted out. "Henry, this is your business!" But Henry just stood there with a cold gaze, watching his enemy being taken away. Adam received several years in prison for financial fraud. His reputation was ruined and his career destroyed. After everything that happened, Henry decided to focus on his children and the company. He knew that life would never be the same again, but it was a life without betrayal and lies. Clara was left alone. She tried to find a way to return to her children, but all her attempts were met by Henry's intransigence. She realized that she had lost everything she had and was left alone with the consequences of her mistakes. Henry gave the children love and care, and the company continued to thrive. Clara lived with the burden of her decisions that destroyed her life. Adam, sitting in prison, realized that he had become a victim of a game that he could not win. This story became a lesson that betrayal and ambition always have their price, and truth and justice will always find a way to win.